The story begins with Yuto timidly calling out to his mother, almost as if he didn't want to interrupt her, while a mask covered his face. At that moment, he was telling her that people around him often said that the mask was strange, and that he heard it so many times it had begun to weigh on him. He wore it even when he just wanted to play, feeling that it bothered him and separated him from others. Because of this, he wished he could take it off, at least for a while. In response to his complaint, his mother calmly explained that the mask was very important, that children had to wear it when going outside so that the gods wouldn't take them away. However, Yuto reacted with irritation, visibly tired of hearing the same thing over and over, convinced that those stories weren't real and that gods didn't exist. It was then that, from the kitchen and with her back turned, his mother let slip a phrase that sounded as much like a promise as a rule. She told him that once he entered middle school, he would graduate from the mask. At that precise moment, he would become part of the adult world. As time passed, the scene shifted and the tone grew heavier. His mother, looking off to the side, announced that Yuto would go live at his grandmother's house. In the boy's mind, the image of that village appeared, as if the name itself carried an ancient echo. Immediately, he thought of his mother and understood that she wasn't saying she would go with him. Surprise spread across his face, and the need to know what would happen to her became inevitable. In response, his mother spoke with a seriousness that left no room for comfort. For her, offering Yuto was a duty, something that had to be fulfilled. Yuto only remembered all of this vaguely, like scattered memories blended with sensations. Among them, he recalled a visit during his childhood, a time when he had already been there. Within those images emerged the figure of a masked being appearing in the darkness, holding a stuffed toy. That memory lingered, suspended, and in that moment, he realized that the village had always had something that didn't feel quite normal. Years later, after transferring to a rural middle school, Yuto, now 13 years old, ended up living alone in his grandmother's hometown. The place was surrounded by lush nature, with clean air and a silence that seemed larger than the streets themselves. On his first walk through the village, he was guided by a woman who came across as charming and kind. For a moment, Yuto clearly noticed that impression. However, he quickly forced himself to correct it. He needed to stay alert. His farewell with his mother hadn't been normal. In his memory, her expression and the atmosphere of that moment had a strange weight, as if something had been left unsaid. As he walked, Yuto picked up on something else. That village didn't appear on maps. The locals called it Shishimori, but the true nature of the place seemed hidden behind that name, as though the everyday was only a facade. At one point, the woman stopped and spoke with a seriousness that didn't match the tranquil scenery. She told him there was something he needed to be careful about while living there. The warning was clear. Yuto must not go outside after 10 at night. Additionally, he must not approach the small shrine located on the outskirts of the village. Hearing this, Yuto was taken aback, and his mind filled with an uneasy understanding. To him, it sounded like a village of dark traditions, a closed-off place, isolated from society, that still clung to ancient laws and legends even in the modern era. As he observed the aligned houses and trees, he didn't notice that someone masked was watching them from the shadows. Yuto then asked why he couldn't go out at that hour. The woman explained that very strange sounds could be heard. Then, with a faint blush, she tried to make light of the matter, saying that the walls of the village buildings were very thin, and so sounds leaked through easily. Yuto stopped in the middle of the street. The explanation sounded simple, but he wasn't sure whether to believe it. Inside, his doubt turned into a firmer suspicion, and he ended up accepting what he had already been feeling. After all, the village did indeed seem like one of dark traditions. However, the woman reacted with indignation, clearly offended by those distasteful rumors. As the granddaughter of the village chief, such comments constantly followed her and were deeply irritating. In response, Yuto immediately apologized, stumbling over his own awkwardness. The woman, for her part, decided that since it was the boy's first day in the village, she would act as if she hadn't heard anything. Nevertheless, deep inside, she couldn't help but admit something that unsettled her. There were things that, no matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't completely deny. Even so, she guided him back onto the right path and firmly reminded him that he needed to be very careful. As they continued walking, she went on explaining more details about the village. During that walk, Yuto observed her from behind, visibly nervous and surprised at how mature she seemed to him. At one point, she told him that he would be living in the house that had belonged to his grandmother, and that the village community would offer him all the support he needed for his daily life. Therefore, he didn't need to worry. However, a darker layer soon surfaced in the situation. The way she looked at him seemed to hide a different kind of intention. In her mind, the woman thought that since Yuto was a boy who had come from the city, she had no intention of letting him get away. That thought triggered a warning signal in Yuto. Everything pointed to this being a bad sign. When they arrived at the house, the woman clearly told him that this would be his new home. At the entrance, a beautiful girl with long hair was waiting, as if she already knew him. Her greeting sounded natural, almost familiar, as if Yuto were truly returning to a place he had never, in theory, visited. Yuto was deeply shaken. His attention focused on details that were impossible to ignore. The girl's hair looked as soft as silk. Her eyelashes were long, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. Then, when he saw her bright eyes up close, he felt like the air had left his lungs. He had no idea who she was, which led him to think they might have come to the wrong house. The woman, still in control of the situation, bluntly clarified that the girl was her best friend, and furthermore, the fiancé assigned to Yuto. The word fiancé dropped into his mind like a weight, leaving him stunned, as if his brain refused to process it. The long-haired girl then calmly explained that Yuto had been offered to the village as her betrothed, and that this was a duty his family had to fulfill. Her words didn't sound cruel, but rather inevitable, as though she were repeating a rule that had always existed. She looked at him intently and declared that the two of them would be joined and would form a family in that place. Immediately afterward, she stepped forward slowly, barefoot, with a confidence that left no room for doubt. In a sudden gesture, she marked the engagement with a clear sign, leaving Yuto completely paralyzed. His eyes widened, and his body didn't respond. The girl explained seriously that this was the proof of their commitment. Yuto, caught in the shock, couldn't find a coherent reaction. Then, she slightly revealed her own neck and said that she, too, wished to receive an equivalent sign. Yuto, trembling with nerves, asked for a moment to try to regain control of the situation. Fear and confusion swirled within him, along with an urgent need to stop what was happening. Finally, the tension broke his voice, and he exploded. To him, the idea of forming a family when they had barely met was incomprehensible, and the sense of danger kept growing without end. The girl, however, responded calmly, as if reciting a simple custom, and stated that in that village, such things were completely normal. Inside Yuto, his perception of the world began to distort, as though everything around him was built on rules entirely foreign to him. He turned to her and demanded that she have a will of her own, but once again, her answer pointed back to the village traditions. She explained that each marriage in the village was expected to follow certain rules. Even so, her expression softened as she admitted that if he insisted, she wouldn't mind going beyond what was established. Finally, as if wrapping up a routine topic, she added that she would be attending the same middle school as him. Yuto was caught in a mix of frustration and nerves. Everything felt like an imposed system, as if his life had already been decided by rules he couldn't begin to understand. The promised girl maintained a serious tone as she stated that they couldn't abandon their duty. She then explained that Yuto had to understand that family held fundamental value as well. Her voice then softened, almost tenderly, as she explained that in the village, it was said that having a fiancé was the ultimate sign of having reached adulthood, and for that reason, she felt happy. However, Yuto interrupted her with visible irritation. He couldn't stand hearing the word fiancé over and over without fully understanding what it meant. At that point, it was the village guide who resumed the explanation and revealed the core custom of that place. She calmly explained that in this village, every inhabitant was given a promised partner. That revelation hit Yuto hard, confirming what he had been suspecting since the first signs. This was, without a doubt, a village ruled by dark traditions. As if the situation weren't already disconcerting enough, the guide added, with an unsettling lightness, that she, too, had a fiancé. The impact on Yuto was total, as if his mind cracked for a moment, unable to process how normalized this social structure was. The guide then went further and spoke about what the custom entailed. She mentioned that, as part of the arrangement, it was not allowed to freely choose whom to be with, and that it had been that way since ancient times. She then formally introduced herself in her family role, reminding him that she was the granddaughter of the village chief, and that as such, she was expected to be the exemplary model of those traditions. However, despite that affirmation, she hinted at a provocation. With a suggestive smile, she floated the idea of breaking with those customs and living differently, as if tempting Yuto with a path even she herself wasn't fully ready to take. Then, she abruptly shifted the focus to something more practical, pointing out that, technologically speaking, the village had no internet connection. However, thanks to her grandfather's authority, she had access to that privilege. It was then that she recalled, clenching her fist, the moment she discovered something that was not meant to be within anyone's reach, the outside world. She discovered romantic stories and the concept of free love, as if they had come from a romantic comedy set in another universe. That revelation was thrilling to her, brilliant and so intense that it swept her away beyond resistance. Over time, she fell completely into that fascination. She began to draw her own fantasies and spent her days dreaming about city conventions, imagining herself among crowds and lights, far away from the rigid rules of the village. However, when faced with reality, that nostalgia turned into sadness. Her position within the community kept her from leaving. She felt chained to tradition, condemned to remain inside that silent cage called custom. In the midst of that intimate moment, the woman gathered all her courage and spoke to Yuto with a trembling seriousness. Her hands moved nervously, as if the decision she was about to make was too heavy to hold, and her shy posture revealed that she was crossing an important line. Even so, she expressed her wish to ask for his help, because he came from the city, and that made him different from everyone else. In an act of sincerity, she gathered all her courage. Her face transformed into an enthusiastic smile, and with a surge of resolve that made her shine from within, she firmly declared that they should destroy that system together. It was then that she revealed her identity. She was Sakurako, representative of the reformist faction. Almost immediately, Yuto noticed another presence beside him. Another girl was also holding his hand. He watched the gesture in silence as she spoke calmly. She said that traditions had their own value. She closed her eyes peacefully, confessing that she deeply loved that village. She described it as a beautiful place, inhabited by kind people, a large, united family. With gentleness, she looked into his eyes and promised to teach him everything he needed to know. Her name was Nin, representative of the conservative faction. The tension between the two women became evident at once. Sakurako reacted with irritation, making it clear that her desire was neither chaotic nor impulsive, but simple. She just wanted the village to be normal. Nin, for her part, responded firmly, arguing that the way the village had functioned until now was precisely what was most normal. Caught between these two opposing stances, Yuto found himself trapped in the middle of the conflict, weighed down by that word that echoed again and again. The idea resonated strongly in his mind, pulling him into a painful memory from the past. He saw himself as a child, listening to the mockery of others because of the mask he used to wear. Children's voices cruelly repeated that he was strange, that he was not normal. That memory from the past merged with the present, leaving Yuto completely motionless for a moment. Within him, a silent, almost intuitive understanding emerged. Perhaps, after all, he had always been destined to arrive at that place from the very beginning. That sensation evolved into a clearer inner narration, a more articulated reflection. To Yuto, the outside world was not as wonderful as many imagined it to be. Taking advantage of that introspection, Nin reinforced her position, pointing out that even he was beginning to think that way. Then she took Yuto's hand again and, with a determined expression, asked him to forget everything that had happened up to that point. She proposed that they move forward together in that village, assuring him that she would do anything for him. Although her words were gentle, they also conveyed an unbreakable firmness. Yuto, however, clenched his teeth. Despite the tenderness in Nin's words, the distrust within him remained intact. It was impossible for him to believe in such a perfectly structured story within a village governed by dark traditions. Even so, something inside him began to crack. As he looked at Nin, his face flushed involuntarily. He noticed her sweetness, the closeness in the way she spoke, her delicate scent, and the silky sensation her presence conveyed. All of it shook him emotionally. It was hard not to feel attracted, and that very ease only confused him further. Meanwhile, Nin glanced towards Sakurako out of the corner of her eye, while Sakurako watched her nervously. Yuto, for his part, was clearly distressed, trapped between the two of them and unsure how to react to the growing pressure of the situation. In that moment of tension, a hand rose awkwardly, breaking the silence. It was Sakurako who, with evident nervousness, began to speak. She expressed that if Yuto decided to help her, she would also be willing to do anything. Her face turned even redder when she admitted that she might not be able to do everything, but that she still wanted to try with all her strength. That vulnerability made her feel closer in Yuto's eyes, and he thought that she was also very cute. Nin watched in silence, attentive to every word and gesture. In Sakurako's mind, a determination solidified. She still remembered the harshness with which Yuto had described the village earlier. It had surprised her, without a doubt. But now she understood that someone capable of saying things like that was exactly the kind of person she needed by her side to change everything. At the same time, Nin reflected in silence. If Yuto chose to challenge the village's traditions, he would no longer be able to be with Sakurako. That thought drew a clear line in her mind. In the end, she concluded that this was not a problem a boy like Yuto could solve easily. Suddenly, both of them issued an urgent call to themselves. They had to wake up. That internal phrase struck like a direct blow of reality. From that moment on, their thoughts began to diverge. Sakurako felt firmly that, if it was with him, perhaps she could change the village. Nin, on the other hand, decided that she would make Yuto give in to her, and that in doing so, she would protect Sakurako. Soon after, both of them stood in front of him, staring at him with gentle smiles. Without hesitation, they asked him a single question: which one of them would he choose? Yuto remained standing, alone before the two of them, completely frozen. Deep within himself, he understood that he would not be able to escape that place. The laws of the village, this land ruled by dark traditions, rose before him like a sealed fate. To obey them or to stray from them was the only choice. The sound of water marked a shift in the scene, as if Yuto's internal narration had reset. Replaying the events, he had arrived at his grandmother's hometown, Shishimori, and suddenly, a fiancée had appeared in his life. Then, the village chief's granddaughter had begun talking about destroying the traditions. All of it had plunged him into growing confusion. In his mind, the images of Sakurako and Nin repeated over and over, both of them staring at him intensely, asking the same question. Reduced to a nervous version of himself, Yuto let out a deep sigh. With a hint of irony, he thought that it all resembled what some people called a popularity streak, as if attention had piled up uncontrollably around him. At the same time, he acknowledged that he might simply be escaping reality by thinking that way. The village he was in, this isolated place called Shishimori, had its own history. Located in a mountainous region with limited resources, it had implemented a betrothal system as a method to regulate the population. The influence of a noble who had visited those lands generations ago and built a shrine had been decisive. Thanks to that, many of the traditions had endured to the present day. Some people even left the village with the purpose of bringing in outside blood, thus ensuring the village's genetic diversity. When Yuto understood the truth, he was left in shock. It not only explained the village system, but also revealed the reason for his own birth. With his hair still wet and his nerves on edge, he stepped out of the bathroom while drying himself. At that moment, Nin was watching him calmly from the doorway. She held a cup in her hands and offered it to him naturally, inviting him to hydrate. Yuto, visibly flushed, thanked her, and at the same time mentally apologized for the thoughts he had had just minutes earlier. The steam from the bath faded behind him, dissolving into the air. in a subtle yet suggestive tone. Nin commented that his bath had been quite long. It did not seem like a simple, casual remark. Then her expression changed, and with seriousness, she asked if perhaps he had been waiting for her. The impact on Yuto was immediate, as if his intentions had been completely exposed. Nervously, he raised a hand to justify himself, claiming that he had actually been thinking about many things regarding what would come from now on. Nin responded calmly, assuring him that there was no need to hide it. Internally, she thought about pure love, and with a gentle smile, she decided to accept Yuto just as he was. Feeling that acceptance, Yuto thought clearly that he loved her. At that moment, Nin took his hand and explained that they needed to begin getting used to each other. Then, in a more serious tone, she added that sooner or later they would have to have children. Yuto turned completely red and reacted abruptly, saying that all of that was too much for him. Nin, equally embarrassed, confessed that she felt very ashamed as well. After a brief silence, Nin took a deep breath and suggested that they both needed to calm down. She informed him that Sakurako was calling for him and told him to go to the Western-style room. As she walked away down the hallway, Yuto remained still, staring silently at his own hand. From the outside, the house seemed peaceful, but inside, he could only think that all of this was really happening. There was no doubt that everything was completely serious. When he reached the indicated room, Sakurako welcomed him with a warm smile. She greeted him, and in a playful tone, commented that he had taken quite a while, hinting that perhaps the heat of the bath had made him dizzy. Feeling awkward, Yuto scratched his head. However, the atmosphere changed when Sakurako looked at his neck and noticed a mark. She apologized on Nin's behalf, saying that she had probably been too aggressive. Resigned, Yuto tried to accept the situation, arguing that if it was a cultural custom, he had no other choice. Sakurako protested immediately. Firmly, she stated that in that village there was no tradition of leaving engagement marks. That revelation left Yuto completely bewildered. With her fingers resting against her face, blushing yet still serious, Sakurako clarified that even though they were engaged, there was no need to go that far before the wedding night. Then, in a more flirtatious tone, she added that what Nin had done was due to her liberal nature. Internally, Yuto reacted with disbelief, trying to process so much information at once. From a short distance away, Sakurako insisted that he should not let himself be confused and firmly reminded him that together they would change the village. He swallowed, still nervous. Then, with a trembling voice, Sakurako expressed a doubt that troubled her. She feared that Yuto had fallen in love with Nin. Without giving him time to respond, she stated that she knew it without needing him to say it, because no one knew Nin's charm better than she did, her best friend. Next, she took out her phone and showed him an image. She said that in the past, Nin had been even cuter, and offered to show him a photo. Confused, Yuto wondered why Sakurako was carrying an image of her. The photo revealed a radiant Nin, happier, more expressive, and freer. Sakurako explained that in the past, Nin had shown her emotions openly, without the restraints she now carried. Then her story grew more serious. She spoke about the origin of the village, explaining that Shishimori was surrounded by dangerous mountains, and that its name was connected to land protected by an ancient god. She revealed that Nin's older sister had broken the traditions and, as a result, had been expelled. What had initially been an instinct of communal protection had transformed into a rigid legal system. Since the shrine took control, the village's rules had served only to protect the privileges of a few. With a mix of seriousness and determination, Sakurako made her purpose clear. She wanted to change the village, not only for herself, but also for Nin's sake. Later on, with a blend of excitement and nervousness, Sakurako confessed that she had a secret dream. She wanted to participate in manga events someday, despite the tradition that forbade members of the village chief's family from leaving the village. Holding several sheets of paper timidly, she handed them to Yuto and asked him to read them and give her his opinion. The request was sudden, and Yuto could not help but feel surprised. At the same time, he discovered a passion in her that he had never imagined before. However, a sense of unease began to tighten in his chest. Although he was worried about Nin, he also felt curious, perhaps that Manga hid some secret about the village. With a playful attitude, Sakurako admitted that she was just an enthusiast and asked him not to be too harsh with his comments. When Yuto opened the manga, he was left bewildered by its content. Then, with a hint of embarrassment but without hiding his honesty, he confessed that it was difficult for him to process what he had just read. Sakurako, surprised, reacted with a wounded tone. Blushing, she defended herself by saying that she thought she was giving him something more useful. That word, useful, hit Yuto hard. He repeated it internally, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. At that moment, he thought that things in that village were very different from the city. Carefully, he tried to explain himself. He pointed out that just as in Shishimori, the wedding night seemed to be considered part of the transition into adulthood. In the city, there were certain things that were forbidden. Sakurako, half hidden behind a column, replied that it seemed to be that way, though she said it with a lightness that unsettled Yuto even more. Then, making a mischievous gesture, she declared that rules were meant to be broken. That phrase set off an alarm inside Yuto. What he felt was not hatred, but a deep fear of what Sakurako's impulsiveness might cause if she were left unchecked in modern society. Night fell over the landscape, and standing by the window, Yuto reflected calmly. He thought that Sakurako was strange, different. Yet he also felt a sincere desire to cooperate with her. As he walked down the hallway, he wondered whether perhaps there was someone better suited to be by her side than he was. When he entered the room, he found Nin sitting quietly. She greeted him with a soft voice and, gently, asked that since they were engaged, he begin calling her Nin-san. Then she extended her hand, as if that subtle gesture were a way of inviting him closer without imposing anything. Nervously, Yuto brought up the subject of the wedding night. Nin looked at him in surprise and did not respond for a few seconds. They stood facing each other in a heavy silence. Finally, Nin lowered her gaze and, with slow movements, adjusted her clothes, as if that act gave her time to process her emotions. With her face flushed and her voice barely audible, she admitted that it was not that she was unfamiliar with the topic, but she also acknowledged, embarrassed, that there was actually no absolute rule stating such a thing. Then she stood up and, turning her back to Yuto, declared with determination that she would return the next morning. Before leaving, she made it clear that she would respect his pace, and that he did not need to worry about it. Immediately after, the sliding door closed sharply with a dry sound, leaving him alone. Alone with her thoughts, Nin reaffirmed herself internally. It was fine. Then she promised herself that she would definitely make Yuto fall for her, because that was the only way she could protect Sakurako. Meanwhile, Yuto remained motionless, staring at the door through which Nin had left, not daring to move or speak. He turned off the ceiling light, lay down, and once again thought about what Sakurako had told him about Nin. In the midst of the silence, a thought emerged clearly. Perhaps Nin was a little bold. That phrase repeated itself in his mind again and again, as if he could not let it go. Yuto continued lying there, eyes open, increasingly aware that he would not be able to fall asleep that night. The following morning, at the Shishimori shrine, two masked girls appeared. One of them was Kikuya Ako, and the other was her younger sister, Kikamiko. Miko spoke to Ako familiarly, asking whether she had already submitted her resignation that morning. Ako confirmed that she had, explaining that she did so in order to be able to miss Sakurako's house. Then, with pride, she stated that it had been drawn directly by her, as if that alone were proof of something extremely important. The declaration left Miko completely stunned. She immediately replied that Ako worked very hard, which caused Ako's expression to shift even more. The surprise on her face turned into concern, and she wondered aloud what her brother might have done to make her take such a drastic decision. At that point, Ako explained that after making the sketch, she had finished it immediately, as if she had not hesitated for a single moment. Then, Miko fixated on a detail that struck her as strange and wanted to confirm something that confused her. For that reason, she asked whether Miss Sakurako was a woman. Ako responded enthusiastically, confirming that she was, and explaining that even though Sakurako was a woman, she herself had drawn her. Hearing that answer, Miko asked for more details and pressed the matter further. Akko was surprised to notice that Miko seemed genuinely interested. In turn, Miko reacted with nervousness and embarrassment, holding back a sound of excitement, as if she wanted to deny it but could not quite do so. Afterward, the scene shifted to the school. There, a woman with a confident posture welcomed everyone enthusiastically, stating that this was the only school in the village of Shikamori. At that very moment, the protagonist was introduced by name, Aguri Yuto. The woman presented to the class the expectation that everyone would be good friends with him, and immediately the students raised their hands with exaggerated enthusiasm, nodding as if it were a collective decision already made. Yuto was stunned, and inside, he felt a chill run through him. His impression was immediate. It was terrifying. As he observed the woman more closely, he noticed a strange detail, her height, which did not match what he expected from a teacher. That woman was Yaguchi Yako. In addition, Yuto also realized that all the students were wearing masks. That sight only reinforced what he had already been feeling. That village was, without a doubt, an absolutely terrible place. Once inside the classroom, someone spoke the protagonist's name. It was Nin. Upon seeing him, she looked relieved and expressed her happiness at being in the same class as him. When Yuto recognized her, he felt that he could finally relax, as if her presence were the only familiar element within all that chaos. Then, Nin explained that for elementary school children there, everything involved wearing masks. That sentence immediately brought back a memory for Yuto, since he himself had been the same way in the past. In this way, he understood that it was something common in that village. Nin also added a detail about the school's structure. Due to the small population, elementary school children shared the classroom with middle school students. Suddenly, a shout from the back of the classroom broke the calm. Someone loudly called out to the teacher. Immediately after, a masked girl burst in with great enthusiasm and rushed straight toward Yuto to make a request. She wanted him to tell her about the capital city. That girl was Shiba Azuki, a first-year middle school student. Azuki moved to the front of the classroom under the teacher's gaze, radiating an energy that seemed impossible to contain. In the end, it became clear that she was also part of the same class as Yuto. Then, Azuki pressed on with her idea. Since teacher Yako refused to talk about the capital, she proposed that Yuto take on that role and become the teacher instead. Faced with that unexpected suggestion, Yuto was taken aback, as if he had been pushed into a role he had never asked for. At that very moment, a statement arose that sounded more like a scolding than a simple remark. The teacher declared that, compared to the capital, life in that village was far more important. Upon hearing this, Azuki reacted angrily and ended her response with a gesture of displeasure, making it clear that she refused to accept that idea. Without allowing any further objections, the teacher abruptly shifted the atmosphere and enthusiastically announced the day's lesson. The topic would be how a child comes into the world. Yuto was stunned, as if the ground were shifting beneath his feet. Meanwhile, the teacher smiled and signaled the beginning of her explanation. Next, the teacher gave instructions while the children used animal masks and asked the 6th grade of Anaka to follow her. However, immediately afterward, she declared that she loved Yuto, justifying it by saying that the lesson was intended for elementary school children. At the same time, Yuto showed his confusion as he noticed that the elementary students were being led somewhere. Then, the teacher explained that independent study was available for students below 5th grade and for middle school students. At that moment, Nin peeked in with curiosity to observe what was happening, while Yuto, visibly overwhelmed, tried to stop the situation and made it clear that they should not listen to the teacher. Just then, new students appeared. Kaori, a 3rd-year middle school student, introduced herself with a smile and explained that she had just moved to the area. She mentioned that she had begun studying independently and added that Yuto was very lucky. Shortly after, Momoka, a 2nd-year student, intervened in a more serious tone to clarify that most of Mrs. Yaguchi's lessons were based on self-study. Next, Kaori continued speaking and commented that since there were no brave students there, she felt a bit uncomfortable. Still, she said she was delighted to meet Yuto. He responded politely, introducing himself and saying that it was nice to meet her. Internally, Yuto wondered whether everything was more normal than he had imagined, clinging to that thought so as not to feel completely lost. From the side, Nin watched the scene with a serious expression. For her, seeing an apparently normal girl talking with Yuto was not interesting. Then, Azuki stepped in again out of curiosity, noticing Yuto's uniform and asking whether he came from the capital. Yuto clarified that he did not, and that in fact, he had not even enrolled in the school yet. Right after that, Yuto noticed another strange detail and wanted to understand why Kaori was the only one wearing a uniform. Kaori replied naturally that it was because of her fiancé, since he liked that kind of thing. With a serious tone and a shadow on her face, Momoka remarked that Kaori had changed. Yuto, in silence, connected that information with what he had already learned. In that village, everyone seemed to have a fiancé. Later, some children approached Kaori with a simple request, asking her to read a kanji. Kaori responded kindly, as if helping were part of her daily routine. Then, Nin stepped in to explain that since Sakurako had already graduated, it was now Kaori who received more attention. The scene showed the children getting along very well with her, while Kaori smiled at them warmly. In the end, Yuto reflected with unexpected calm. Life in that place seemed to be based on helping one another, as if that were the true essence of everyday life. Later on, Yuto and Nin walked together along the path. Yuto thought that all of this might have been influenced by the school's teachings, searching for a logical explanation for what was happening. Suddenly, Nin stopped and stared at him, holding a direct, persistent gaze that made him feel exposed. With that same firmness, Nin voiced her displeasure. To her, Yuto looked too much at other girls, especially Kaori, she pointed out bluntly. Finally, she added a more concrete observation, wondering whether he liked uniforms. Yuto reacted with confusion, trying to understand exactly what she meant. Then, Nin made a direct confession, reminding him that he was her fiancé. With a serious yet gentle expression, she made her desire clear without any detours. She wanted Yuto to look only at her. Later, the two of them continued walking together through the forest. The atmosphere was calm. However, Nin suddenly moved closer, and that unexpected gesture made Yuto blush and let out a small sound. Inside, he felt completely overwhelmed. The emotion struck him hard, and he realized that he was falling in love without being able to stop it. Nin watched him closely, maintaining a serious but determined attitude, and within herself, she felt that only a small push more was needed. Meanwhile, Yuto, dizzy from his own feelings, stared off into the distance, unable to process everything at once. Then, the scene opened to a wide view of snow-covered mountains, and a quiet farewell marked the end of that moment, accompanied by a promise to see each other again the next day. The following morning, Nin was having breakfast while recalling what Yuto had said the night before. The clock read 6:30, and in her mind echoed the thought that he had suggested going first. At the same time, Yuto walked through the school with a thoughtful expression, wondering what Nin might be planning. When he entered the classroom, he greeted everyone naturally. However, as he headed toward his seat, someone stopped him and asked him to look. At that instant, Nin appeared wearing a uniform, posing with elegance and determination. Yuto looked at her in surprise, and Nin made it clear that she was also wearing a uniform as a direct response to his desire. Next, Nin explained that she was doing it because it was what Yuto wanted, and that she was willing to fulfill it. Immediately, the class's attention focused on the two of them. Several voices commented on how cute Nin looked, while someone insinuated that Yuto was forcing her. At that accusation, he reacted at once, clarifying that it was all a misunderstanding. Then, Nin asked quite naturally whether she did not look cute. Yuto remained silent. In his thoughts, an inevitable comparison emerged. She was imitating Kaori's eye-catching style. Even so, he could not help but admit to himself that Nin looked very cute. Meanwhile, Nin, arms crossed, seemed completely satisfied. With a coquettish smile, she allowed him to look at her once more. Yuto reacted nervously, unable to respond clearly. Nin, for her part, smiled to herself, convinced that her method was working. At that moment, both of them turned their heads as they noticed Kaori entering the classroom. Nin reacted immediately, asking what was going on with her appearance, while Yuto watched her in confusion. Kaori appeared wearing a far from casual uniform, displaying a carefree confidence, and explained that she dressed that way because her fiancé liked it. At the same time, Nin shot a silent warning at Yuto, telling him to stop looking. Yuto let out a brief, tired reply, stating that he was not looking. Beside him, Nin was clearly irritated by the situation.